Hello, we have with us today Prophetess Tamika. Welcome, Prophetess. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Tell us about yourself.
So, as you've mentioned, I'm Prophetess Tamika Pusey. I'm Prophetess Tamika Rose Pusey. I've got to put the rose in there because I am known on social media as Tamika Rose. Rose is my middle name, but Tamika Pusey. So, I am the co-founder, co-leader of Restoration Fellowship Ministries. I'm senior pastor of our church in Birmingham. I'm also a senior administrator at the University of Birmingham, so that's my 9 to 5, you could call it. And I'm also the director of our CIC company called RFM Wellspring as well. So we'll wear a few hats.
Okay. What does a CIC do?
That's community interest company.
Yeah.
So we have, we're just starting up. We have a passion and interest in helping our community through providing education and various endeavours to empower our community.
Okay. So you put on events and you...
Yes, we put on events, training, etc. As I said, we're currently starting up. We're looking into doing our first training on for mental health awareness, which is something that we're quite passionate about as well. So looking forward to doing that.
Okay, fantastic. So prophetess, that means that you are a prophet. Tell me about that. When did you get this gifting?
It's an interesting one because I grew up as a child having often dreams and visions, things that I didn't quite understand and didn't quite have a language for. So although I grew up going to Sunday school, I went to a Pentecostal church, I had very little understanding of what the prophetic was. I understood about the movement of Holy Spirit, etc., but I didn't learn about the prophetic in my church, and so I grew up with questions about why I was having these visions, these dreams and certain things. It wasn't until much later on in life when I encountered an apostle and received further teaching about the prophetic, and also had many prophetic confirmation from others stating quite clearly, you're called as a prophet to the nations. And sometimes some of those prophecies would almost feel a bit like a chastisement, as if to say, why are you not operating in your call yet? So I kind of stepped into that call around 2018, I believe it was, possibly earlier actually. And yeah, stepped into and embraced the call that had always been on my life.
So does that mean that God tells you things which are going to happen in the future and that they actually happen?
Sometimes it can be it can be what we'd call a word of knowledge about something that is currently happening. It could be, for example, I remember speaking with a couple who was doing an event for our church, and just as we were talking, I literally had a thought. I can only describe it as a thought, where I thought of them packing boxes, and this thought came out of nowhere, and I said to them, I said, are you by? I see you packing boxes. Are you by any chance planning to move? And the couple were quite shocked, and they said, yes, actually we are. We're literally in the process of moving our family to another state. We were a little bit reluctant about the move, but wow, we can't believe that you're mentioning it. So yeah, sometimes it can be things like that, as well as, of course, insight into further into the future. It could be insights into political happenings and all sorts, but yeah.
Okay. Are people worried about the kind of things that you say?
I always find it so interesting, actually. Yes, there are times when, as soon as people hear that I operate in the prophetic, sometimes people get a little bit guarded. And I can understand why, because unfortunately, there have been many times where the prophetic has been completely mishandled, irresponsibly handled. People have used it, unfortunately, to manipulate and to say things to people that has been quite harmful, really. And sometimes people are just scared at the thought that, oh my gosh, what are you going to reveal about me that I didn't perhaps want anyone to know. So yeah, it's always quite interesting seeing how people sometimes react. But I always say that the true prophetic that God gives us with is to encourage, is to bring hope, is to speak life. So yeah.
I would imagine that maybe you've had people say, oh, can you, almost like they're asking to read their palm or something, which is
Yes.
different, I know. But have people come to you and said, oh, can you tell me which way to go or what's going to happen in the next 6 months? Have you had those kind of questions?
I've had instances where I've during altar ministration, so when we usually in church service or at an event, and we invite people to come up for prayer. There have been times when perhaps in praying for people, the prophetic is also flowing forward, and I've had an instance where I didn't particularly receive anything for an individual prophetically. I prayed for them, but I didn't receive anything. There wasn't anything that the Lord, I felt Holy Spirit was giving me specifically for this individual. And afterwards they approached me and said, they almost wrestled me for a prophetic word. They were quite insistent. You gave a word for everyone, but you didn't say anything for me. And I prayed with them and I encouraged them, in that moment. But yeah, I've had times like that.
Okay. Okay, so can we go back a bit? Give us an idea of your early life. Where were you born and brought up? Your education, your profession, and how you came to know the Lord.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Birmingham. I was born and raised in Birmingham, and I come from a Jamaican heritage. My grandparents are Jamaican, and I grew up being sent to Sunday school. My sister and I always often joke about that. We were dressed up, ribbons in our hair. My mum would wait for the minibus to come and pick us up, and she would send us off. She would never come to church with us, but she would send us off. And so, yeah, we would be sent to Sunday school. Interestingly, our weekends used to be that we would go to a Pan-African Saturday school on a Saturday, and then we would go to Sunday school on a Sunday, of which my sister and I would often complain. Monday to Sunday, we are at school all the time. School, never a break. And my mom insisted that it was best for us. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background in terms of home life, going to Saturday school, Sunday school. I also went to a Catholic primary school, so Christianity was something that was very much a part of my upbringing, and very much a part of the culture to an extent. And I say to an extent because part of my family were also Rastafarian, including my dad. And so it was an interesting mix for us growing up. Although I didn't grow up with my dad living in our home, the influence from other Rastafarian relatives, and of course my dad was quite significant for us as well. So it's quite interesting. So along the journey, although being raised going to Sunday school and going to a Catholic primary school and having all of that influence, along the way I was trying to find myself and understand spirituality and all of those things, and so I explored a bit of New Age as some people do. I explored horoscopes and trying to find the meaning of life in all of these things. And somewhere in my late teens, I resolved that those all led to more questions, more than answers. And so I became much more curious about the Christianity I'd been exposed to growing up. And unfortunately, along the way, I as I was still trying to find myself, I became a mom at a young age, at the age of 20. I had my daughter, and it was that actually that then kind of propelled me right back into church, and finding my way, and giving my life to the Lord after having my daughter. So yeah.
Okay. And how did the conversion happen?
Yes. Well, where do I start? After having my after the breakdown of my relationship with my daughter's father, I had gone through postnatal depression as well as the forms of depression. But as God would have it, and I say as God would have it because I believe it was divinely orchestrated, I felt compelled one day to go to my local GP and explain to my local GP how I was feeling at the time. And I was quite concerned that the GP would probably turn me away because I had no physical symptoms or anything wrong with me. I didn't quite understand the mental health aspect at the time. So when I went to the GP straight away recognised the signs of depression, postnatal depression more specifically, and recommended some therapy for me, and recommended some talking therapy, some counselling, and put me in connection with a pastor at a local church in Birmingham. And when I went for my first session, that's where I just felt God was leading me at that time, right as where I needed to be. So that sort of started me back towards where I needed to be. So as I had those sessions with the counsellor, although she wasn't trying to impose Christianity on me, certainly she asked me would I welcome prayer and certain things like that. It helped me to reconnect with my roots, as it were. And then from there, as I was on my journey of healing, I later had a visit from an aunt of mine who's from Jamaica, and she stayed with us for a few months, as she herself was quite devout in her Christianity. And I remember one night at home, I'd woken up in the early hours of the morning to feed my daughter, and I saw my aunt sitting on the step reading her Bible and praying, and I thought, I didn't grow up in a household where that happened. So I was thinking, this is strange. Why would anyone get up in the early hours of the morning to read their Bible and to pray? And when I spoke with her, the way she talked about Jesus in such an intimate way in a way that made him so real. Not just this unknown or unrelatable character. He was so real, and she spoke with such a passion. And again, that kind of stirred me up even more, reconnecting me once again to what I had grown up with. And so, with her prayers, with her encouragement, we were later invited to a church service by Dr. Carol Tomlin, who was at the time visiting a church that had just started up in Birmingham. And she invited my aunt along, and my aunt then said, do you want to come along, going to this church? And at the time, I had a choice between going to a party, my cousin's party, or going to this church event. And it was this crossroads, and I remember that day feeling such a compelling to just go with my aunt. And I'm so glad that I did, because it was there at that church service that I encountered. There was the altar ministration as people were invited up for prayer. I'd gone up, and the apostle at the time who was ministering had a prophetic word for me, and he'd said that he spoke about the call that was on my life. He talked about, he said, I see you singing, making records and leading people in ministry. And he talked about all these things that I had once dreamed about and had visions about as a little girl. And so I felt like I'd arrived home, as it were, after that journey. So right there and then I received that confirmation, and that was the moment when I really, really opened my heart up fully to Jesus.
Thank you. Tell us about times when you've had to be resilient, times when you've really suffered, even as a Christian, because people think, oh, everything's going to be all right. But, there are still issues, still problems, still things we have to overcome. Tell us about those times.
Oh, there's been so many times. There have been many times. Oftentimes when we think about our testimony of salvation, even giving our lives to the Lord, sometimes people have these almost dramatic conversions that sound as if they lived one particular life and completely left that behind, and all of the challenges that was with that is now, dead and buried with Christ Jesus. And as much as that is the reality for some, the reality is along the way we all have challenges and things. So for me, I mentioned depression earlier. Depression was something that revisited once again, this time after COVID. So after, or rather sort of in between. So as we were navigating COVID as a church and finding ways to stay connected with our brethren, finding ways to encourage people during a very challenging, uncertain time. It was also at that time, or rather I should say slightly afterwards, where I felt depression creeping back in as questions over my, or whether or not I'm actually called to be a pastor. I would question many times whether or not I should actually be doing this thing called ministry. Should I be doing ministry? Isn't it best left to others who are more capable and more equipped? And I'd have all these doubtful thoughts that would come in. And in the midst of that, I sometimes think of myself as someone who at times was literally reaching out, for for something to keep them afloat. And for me, that reaching out was continuing to stay, even if I didn't feel like I could pray a lot, or if I felt like I couldn't read my Bible a lot. Sometimes it would be in the soft whispers and singing songs of worship, even when there would just be tears falling. Or sometimes it would be through speaking to some of my loved ones, or Dr. Carol, or any of those who would sometimes encourage me right there in the midst of that storm. But constantly looking for God's hand and reaching out for it, even when I felt like everything was just falling apart. But I would say to anyone who at times goes through anxiety or depression, and if you are a person of faith, if you are a Christian, sometimes we can be led to think that everything should be right and perfect. If we are believers, then our faith means that we should never ever have doubts and have questions and things like that. But the truth is, we may face doubts and we may have questions. Our faith may go through crises at times, but as long as we continue to whisper his name, even if we can't muster anything else, as long as we continue to sing those songs of Zion, even when we find ourselves, when we find ourselves in a place that's obscure. So I'd say, no matter how small the whisper, no matter how quiet the song, keep singing anyway, and keep whispering anyway, and God will pull us through.
What would you say to people who are watching, who need some words of motivation to spur them on? They might have high aspirations but feel that they're despairing and ever achieving. What would you say to them?
I would say to, it's going to sound really strange, but growing up in the church that I used to grow up in, we would sing many choruses, and one of them was "Press along, saints, press along in God's own way." You know, the hotter the battle, the sweeter the victory. And I say that those words are something that can encourage and I hope motivate us all, that if we continue to press along, it's so easy sometimes to lose motivation. As I said before, I'm someone who's battled with depression, I've battled with anxiety, and with that sometimes comes a sense of a loss of motivation. And I would say again, every little step, every little bit helps. It really does. So please, I'd say, stay encouraged. This too shall pass. Whatever the challenge is, I know as someone who's lived it, and God will see you through. He will bring you out on the other side. And there is light, most definitely, at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. Now, you're a female pastor, and I've got to say there aren't very many of them around. Tell us about how people view you as a female pastor.
I'll tell you an interesting story. When I, not too long after I became a pastor, I actually was appointed as the assistant pastor to Dr. Carol Tomlin when we started our ministry, and I was at the tender age of 26. I won't say how old I am now, but I'm a long way away from 26. And so I was that age, and I remember sometime after starting the church and being ordained into ministry, I encountered someone who, a young man that I knew from the community many years prior, and he was on the bus, and he just so happened to be evangelizing, handing out tracts to people on the bus, and he when he encountered me and he was giving me a tract and he was inviting me to church and so on, I subtly said to him, I thanked him and I said, oh, thank you. I have my own church. He goes, oh, what church is that? Who's the pastor? I said, well, me, along with Dr. Carol. To which his response was, he was really horrified. You're a pastor? How can you be a pastor? He said, that could never be in my church. For one, you're a woman, and for two, you're not married. And I said, well, I'm glad I don't go to your church then. And that was it. But, not to be dismissing of him. I appreciated that his beliefs, of course, were rooted in everything that he'd been taught about ministry and where women belong in ministry. But it was one of many other encounters I've had where people are shocked. People sometimes, unfortunately, feel like as a woman, as a single woman, that perhaps you may be someone who seeks to usurp authority. Perhaps you're someone who's quite rebellious. Maybe you're someone who just likes to be in a position of leadership. And it's quite interesting because I'm absolutely the opposite. I am much more comfortable in the background. I didn't seek ministry. I did not seek leadership. It's something that kept calling me.
Okay. Are there many in your church?
We do. We do have some brothers in our church, and we're so thankful for them and the way in which they encourage us and the way in which they support the ministry. At the same time, I'm not going to be unrealistic and pretend that men and women have expressed concerns sometimes over the fact that we are primarily a female-led church, and neither myself or Dr. Carol at this time are married, which is another thing that has really at times caused people to pause and wonder, well, where there's absolutely no men present in the senior leadership. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
But I'm sure you've had females and males come in and some of them have got married. So it doesn't mean it stops them from being married, does it?
Exactly. In fact, I would say majority of our church members, funnily enough, are married and have got married. In fact, I was quite privileged earlier this year to officiate a wedding of one of our former members. I say former now because she's now married to a pastor and she's left our congregation. I quite happily gave her away. It was a very proud moment for me. And as I said, one of many. We've been very blessed to have many weddings in our church, in our ministry over the years. So it's a blessing.
So what's your aspirations for your church?
My aspirations for our church is to go deeper in the Lord, to go higher in the Lord, to go further in the Lord. What that looks like is to have such a maturity in our faith that we the vision for our church is that we are advancing God's kingdom in unity and in love. So for us, it's all about, as I said, reaching that place of maturity in our faith, that we are advancing the kingdom of God and all that means in unity and in love.
Okay, and you guys train other ministers as well, don't you?
We do. It's quite interesting that God has, in funny ways, brought people along as we've been journeying in this ministry, who have been encouraged and empowered, and we've supported them as they've gone out and they do their ministry or strengthen them in their ministry. I myself have supported many women in their ministry. I've supported many women even through I've been a graphic designer. That's something else that I've done in the past. And through my creative work as a graphic designer, I have been assistant editor to the Women Empowering Women magazine, which was founded by Jacqueline Annie. That was a ministry in itself, alongside other ministries that I have really given my support to, in whether it's through the creative ways or just encouraging the women that do it, and it's been a blessing.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I wanted to say thank you very much for sharing for sharing your story and your journey.
Thank you.
I hope it encourages people to watch. Thank you. We will put underneath the video how people can contact you if they want to speak with you or invite you to speak.
Yeah,
All
wonderful.
right. Take care.
Thank you.